Workers or patients in psychiatric units of clinics, what experiences have you been through that left a lasting mark on you? I'm about to choose my field of study this year, and I'm leaning towards psychology or psychiatry. I'd really like to hear about the most difficult situations you faced, either during your career or while being hospitalized.
Clinical psychologist here.
I used to work in a prison and did a parole evaluation for an inmate that was a high-ranking gang member in a national gang. In fact, he was placed in that prison to hold his people accountable and keep the peace. He had a long violent record and was, in my opinion, a genuine psychopath. He was so clinical in his description of how he tortured and left this guy to die over an unpaid debt. If you play with fire, you get burned, was his phraseology for the act, like it was nothing. He was also very nonchalant about his ability to take care of his business while inside. I believed him. He had only spent 14 months of his last 20 years of activity outside of prison. My recommendation was not to parole him. There were various factors that I gave, and in the end the parole board went with my recommendation. So the part that actually scared me was this guy's ability to affect the world outside. He could have sent someone to my house if he wanted to. I had no doubt about that. More experienced psychologists told me not to worry about it, that he knew the score and wouldn't take it personally. I was running a long-term offender group a few months later, and he was part of it. After the first group, I pulled him aside and asked if we were good. He smiled at me and told me not to worry. I did my job, and he didn't blame me for writing what I did because it was true. He went on to be a really insightful and active group member.
Criminal defense lawyer here. A lot of those guys basically understand that we exist in the system, but we're in a different role than they are. So they might kill a guy for shorting them on cash because he's part of their world, but not be upset at the prosecutor who sends him to jail for a decade because that prosecutor isn't. It's an interesting disconnect.
During my time as a medical student, I was asked to check on the patient in the psychiatric section of the emergency department. I walked in wearing my short white coat, holding a clipboard, and asked him what had brought him in that day. He locked eyes with me, sweating, bloodshot eyes, saliva pooling at the corner of his mouth, and said, "The devil told me to kill you, then kill myself." There was a strange odor in the air, and something about the way he said it felt far too real. The door was behind him, and I wasn't sure I could reach it in time if things went south. I didn't know if he had any kind of weapon. I thought about shouting for help, but didn't want to set him off, especially since we were tucked away in a quiet part of the emergency room. So I stayed. I kept him talking for about 30 minutes, trying to stay calm. Slipped out when he started to look sleepy. First thing I was taught when doing psych rounds, never let a patient get between you and the door. I'm a clinical psychologist in training, and while I've never personally felt unsafe with a client, a friend of mine had a case that really crossed some lines. Without sharing anything that would breach confidentiality, I can say the client was dealing with compulsive sexual behavior and struggled to manage boundaries. At one point, he inappropriately asked if they could watch adult videos together during a future session so he could demonstrate his behavior. In another session, he began describing his habits in detail while also touching his genitals in a way that made my friend deeply uncomfortable. There were many other challenges with this client, but once these incidents occurred, her supervisor immediately pulled her off the case. It was clear that it wasn't an appropriate fit for someone in training, and most importantly, my friend didn't feel safe continuing the sessions. I'm not a psychologist, but I witnessed a mental health crisis in my ex that left me completely shaken. He had just started a new medication, and for some reason his body reacted terribly. He began experiencing intense hallucinations and occasional blackouts. He'd do things without any memory of them afterward. Sometimes he'd call me in the middle of the night, panicked and yelling, and later have no recollection that the conversation even happened. He had a history of hallucinations, but the meds made everything worse, more unstable, and more dangerous. There's one night I'll never forget. We were on the phone during one of his episodes when he suddenly said, "I boiled some water." I asked him why, especially at 3 a.m, and he responded in an unsettlingly calm voice. "They told me I need to put my hand in it." I was frozen. It felt surreal and terrifying. The next morning, I finally convinced him to go to the hospital to get his meds checked. While at the hospital, he began vomiting blood. The doctors later found out that during one of his blackouts, he had swallowed the entire bottle of his medication. They had to pump his stomach. I'm not a psychologist, but my dad is a retired forensic one. Over the years, he's seen more than anyone should, but there's one case he told me about that stuck with me. It was actually his very first murder case, back when he was still new in the field.
It involved a man who had been repeatedly asking a woman out, even though she told him clearly again and again that she wasn't interested. Finally, one day he followed her home where he stabbed her parents and the family dog to death. I don't really want to hear about any of his other cases.
My wife works in a psychiatric unit, and I used to worry about her all the time. Then, one day she told me the patients really like her. She's a psychologist, but more of a bridge between the patients and the higher-ups. She always stands up for them. When she was pregnant, the patients who'd been there longer made sure the new ones knew not to mess with her. They'd say things like, "That's my doctor. You don't raise your voice to her. You don't threaten her. You treat her well." It was really touching. Now that she's been promoted to an administrator, she still makes time to see patients across all her units. That's how she keeps herself and her coworkers safe. From what I've heard, working in psych is about half building genuine connections and half dealing with paperwork. That balance makes it rewarding for the staff and bearable for the patients. Honestly, I don't think I could do what she does. She's amazing at her job, as are many of the people working there.
We spend a lot of time not being heard. When someone listens to us, really listens, really cares, it means the world to us. Stigma is real and painful. Mental illness is ugly and brutal. And if you aren't fitting into a certain box, a lot of people are downright scared of you. People like your wife treat us like human beings. For damn sure, that's worth protecting. When the world pretends we don't exist because they don't know how to handle us, being acknowledged and seen is one of the most validating things. Tell her thanks. People like her are the reason I'm still alive. The more I hear and read about psych hospitals, the more sure I am that I never want to work at one. Things like first time attempting to be murdered, I can't imagine dealing with things like that on a daily basis.
Come on, man. I'm a bartender and people try to attempt murder me like at least twice a month. The only difference is are usually slowed down by alcohol, unlike mental patients.
One time, when I was hospitalized during a psychotic episode caused by bipolar disorder, I had this vivid hallucination that my parents and little brother were arriving at the hospital. I imagined them coming up an escalator, which wasn't actually there, and I thought my dad was about to get attacked by some guys. In a panic, I lunged at a nurse trying to reach them. I pushed her down, tried to pull out my catheter, and ran around the ward trying to save my dad while nurses struggled to hold me back. Looking back, I feel terrible because I really hurt that nurse. By the time I came to my senses and wanted to apologize, but her shift was already over and I never got the chance to say sorry. I'm a psychotherapist with a master's degree, and over the years I worked with quite a few clients accused of serious crimes, including one involved in a triple premeditated homicide. Strangely enough, despite the severity of their charges and underlying mental illness, I never felt afraid around them. They were often surprisingly composed and reasonable during sessions. But there was one client, woman with a brain injury, who regularly became physically aggressive. She assaulted not only me, but also security staff and even a psychiatrist. What made it difficult was the unpredictability. After an hour in seclusion, she could talk calmly, then suddenly become violent again, sometimes biting or spitting. So, have I ever been scared? Yes, but not of the people you'd expect. The real danger sometimes comes from those who don't look threatening at all. My wife and I used to work as house parents in a home for girls aged 5 to 18, all of whom had different mental health challenges. Some of the stories we encountered were deeply disturbing. One 6-year-old had committed acts that no child should ever even know about. I won't tell in details, but it involved knife and threats. And yet, when she was with us, she was cheerful and incredibly kind. We worked with girls who had a history of arson, harming animals, and serious violence, but the ones who truly kept me on edge were those with a talent for manipulation. All kids test boundaries, of course, but some took it to another level. One, in particular, had a history of making serious false accusations, with such convincing detail that she destroyed families and lives. As a male, rule of thumb is, never be alone in a room with any one girl. With this girl, I couldn't even be in the same room without my wife also present and cameras consistently monitoring our interactions. I once worked in a juvenile detention center, where one of the youngest boys in our care, despite his age, had already committed serious acts of violence and harm. When I spoke with him, what struck me the most was his complete lack of remorse. He talked about what he had done with a disturbing sense of pride, and even expressed the desire to do it again. He seemed to understand how the system worked. He said things like, "I look innocent. I don't fit the stereotype of someone dangerous. People won't suspect me, and they don't know everything I've done." I'll never forget the look in his eyes. It was evil. A month later, he was released and sent back home. And since they didn't want to ruin his childhood, they destroyed his records. It's been 15 years, and every time I hear about a murder or rape, I think, if that was him.
Wait, they destroyed his records. How did anyone have the authority to do that? I have no idea. I left my in-laws' house. They suspect that the parents paid off some people to do that.
Forensic social worker. I once had a client threaten to kill and rape me. Order of operations are unclear. It wasn't just a moment of anger, it was calculated. He even mentioned places where you could wait and watch me arrive at work. Things escalated and it took multiple officers and medical staff to restrain him while he shouted disturbing threats. It ended up taking multiple police officers and EMS to restrain him while he was screaming about raping me. He was involuntarily hospitalized for a while, and I was informed that he repeatedly asked about me during his stay. The whole situation deeply affected me and led to a period of acute stress. Most of my clients were kind and respectful, but some situations leave a mark.
I once met a woman on the New York City subway who used to work as a criminal psychologist.
She shared a case that changed the course of her life. She was investigating a man suspected of abusing his 4-year-old daughter. When questioned, she said he looked straight into her eyes without blinking or shaking and admitting to everything, saying, "She is my daughter and I'm allowed to do with her as I please." After that case, she left psychology and went to law school. Told me it scarred her for life and she was ready to be the one getting monsters like him locked up.
Thank you for watching today. I'm looking forward to reading your stories in the comments below, and don't forget to check out our other videos as well.
See you in the next video.